An important point to bear in mind in the work of the United Nations is the distinction between what we consider and call regional groups at the United Nations versus what are referred to as political groups, at times even informally major political groups. Regional groups in New York headquarters are the following. We have the Western European and Other States Group, the Group of Latin American and Caribbean States, the Eastern European States Group, the Group of African States, and the Group of Arab States. What that implies is that the membership of the United Nations divides itself into 5 regional blocks, regional groups. And we often, some of them are referred to by their acronyms. The WEOG for the Western European and Other States Group, and the GRULAC. And the chairmanship of these groups changes on a monthly basis. The groups are independent of the Secretariat. They will conduct the meetings that they need to, discuss the issues they need to in a collective fashion. But it is the regional groups, for example, who will endorse candidates for election processes, who will endorse those that they would want to support for chairmanships of the main committees of the General Assembly, for the presidency of the Economic and Social Council, for a number of issues, also for in terms of conveying documentation of a more special nature, though. But all to say that from the regional groups, in particular through the voice or the communication of the chairperson in a given month, important information is conveyed to the Secretary General or to the Secretary of a main committee on the proceedings of the group. But in particular, when it comes to identifying candidates to lead intergovernmental bodies, which would in turn indicate that the group as a whole agrees that Ambassador so-and-so from country such and such is their preferred candidate to lead a certain process. That formal communication is critical for those in the Secretariat who handle electoral processes in general, as an example. Those are your regional groups, who also are involved by definition in all negotiating processes. Then we have what we tend to call the political groupings, or the major political groups. And these take the form, in particular, and certainly for the Economic and Financial Committee, they are well known and critical to the work of the second committee. They are the Group of 77 in China, which is essentially the group of all developing countries at the UN that involves 130 plus developing countries that work collectively. Again, they work separately as they see fit, with a chairmanship that is elected by the group on a yearly basis. At the time of my speaking to this audience, the current chairmanship of the Group of 77 rests with Fiji, for example, for this year 2013. We also have the CARICOM, which is the community of Caribbean Community of States, which is another such grouping. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, is yet another such grouping. The Group of Least Developed Countries, the so-called LDCs, is another such grouping. The Group of LLDCs, which is the landlocked developing countries, is another such grouping. We have seen such groups evolve over the years. The Group of 77 in China has been a recognized group for a very long time, also because of its large membership. These groups are very important in the work of the committee, not least because by virtue of the practice over the years, many of the draft resolutions that the second committee will be considering are draft resolutions that emanate originally from the Group of 77 in China as a base text for discussion. Informal and formals will then ensue on that particular draft resolution, to which everyone, the European Union, the Western European and Other States Group, all kinds of groupings will contribute. Another grouping that I didn't indicate is referred to as the CANS group, which is comprised of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Three member states that often may act in consonance with each other, not necessarily, but oftentimes have that same voice. Another grouping that you may also sometimes hear referred to is JUSCANS, which stands for Japan, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. These types of groupings may take the form of a representative of a certain group speaking on behalf of the group in a general debate on a given issue. They would, for example, Australia could inscribe itself on the list of speakers and take the floor and indicate that it is speaking on behalf also of Canada and New Zealand or others. The Group of 77 in China, the given presiding member state of the group will take the floor and speak on behalf of the group. Whichever country is presiding on the group of the LDCs will do the same. This is not an obligation, but it is a practice in the second committee that the Group of 77 in China generally speaks at the very start of any general debate, as will other major groups, to then be followed by individual member states. The reason being that the representative of a larger grouping would give a message, would give a statement that that larger grouping supports. Then individual member states will provide their national statements on given issues. The European Union also, of course, falls amongst the major groupings. And for the General Assembly, there is a resolution that was adopted a few years ago, fairly recently, that gives it somewhat of an enhanced standing as opposed to the standing it had a few years before. The European Union enjoys the position of being an observer intergovernmental organization in the United Nations. So-called IGOs traditionally have to have been vetted by the General Assembly, in particular by the 6th Committee, which is the legal committee of the General Assembly. And if the Assembly agrees to grant observer status to an intergovernmental organization, that organization will then have the privilege of listening in and partaking in the deliberations of the General Assembly. They will be given the opportunity to speak after member states. With respect to the European Union, which had this position for a fairly long period of time, a couple of years ago, the General Assembly adopted a resolution whereby the European Union, for the purposes of the General Assembly, not for the purposes of the Economic and Social Council, not for the purpose of the Security Council, for the purpose of the General Assembly, its main committees, and some of the UN conferences, will be able to speak amongst the so-called major groups of countries, which is something that for the European Union was clearly important to advance their own status as a constituency in the United Nations.